Just when Red Bull thought they had weathered the storm, the FIA has launched a brutal new offensive, one that threatens to dismantle the very foundation of their Formula One dominance. After Christian Horner's shocking sacking, the team has been left leaderless, vulnerable and wide open to attack. And now, like sharks smelling blood, the FIA is pouncing. A sudden rule change is on the horizon, tailor-made to curb Red Bull's power, strip away their strategic advantages, and rewrite the rules of engagement. Years of supremacy are now at risk. With no shield, no political strongman to fight back, and rivals circling like vultures, Red Bull is facing a nightmare scenario, and the clock is ticking. Is this the beginning of a ruthless takedown of F1's most dominant force? Formula One might be basking in its golden age now, but it wasn't always this glamorous. Wind the clock back to 2009, and the sport was teetering on the edge. Honda, Toyota, and BMW, three powerhouse manufacturers, walked away almost in unison, leaving the grid dangerously underpowered and the future uncertain. To plug the growing hole, F1 scrambled to introduce three fresh teams in 2010. But by the time Haas finally entered the scene, all three had collapsed under the weight of financial and competitive pressure, shrinking the grid back to a modest 20 drivers. Amidst this storm, one small but legendary team reached its breaking point. The owner of Minardi threw in the towel, unwilling to keep fighting a losing battle. With the team's survival hanging by a thread, F1 boss Bernie Ecclestone turned to one man with the resources and ambition to keep the lights on: Red Bull's Didi Mateschitz. In a moment that would alter the sport's DNA, Mateschitz stepped in, saved the team, and thus Toro Rosso was born. A second Red Bull team that would become far more than just a junior outfit. It would become a critical piece of F1's survival plan. Owning two Formula One teams might sound like the ultimate power move, and on paper it certainly comes with perks. Chief among them, double the votes on the all-important F1 Commission, giving Red Bull more influence than most rivals could ever dream of. But dig a little deeper, and the picture isn't quite so clear-cut. Historically, teams have often voted in blocks, aligning themselves based on engine suppliers, strategic partnerships, or mutual interests. So, while Red Bull's dual ownership offers theoretical leverage, in practice, it's not always the trump card it appears to be. Still, the setup hasn't escaped scrutiny. In recent years, criticism has grown louder, with McLaren CEO Zak Brown emerging as the most vocal critic of Red Bull's AB team model. Speaking to Sky Sports, Brown didn't mince words. "I think the AB team is a real problem moving forward. Co-ownership? You don't really see that in any other sport, and it creates a major conflict of interest." And he's got a point. From the NBA to the Premier League, no major global sporting league allows one owner to field two teams in direct competition. Formula One, now governed by a strict budget cap and aiming to level the playing field, stands as the exception to that rule. So, now that we have a budget cap, we need to be really a sport of total fairness, Brown added. Anytime you have an entity that owns two teams or an A and B relationship, I think it really starts to compromise the integrity of sporting fairness. That's something that really needs to be tackled. Back when AlphaTauri quietly began shifting significant operations to the UK, nestling themselves within Red Bull's sprawling Northamptonshire campus, it should have set off alarm bells. The optics alone were bold. A supposed sister team, planting roots in the very shadow of its parent, blurring the lines between independence and influence. But the F1 establishment, already entangled in a standoff with the FIA over the controversial push for an 11th team, didn't have the appetite to open another front. The dual-team debate was simply swept aside. And with Christian Horner still firmly in command of Red Bull Racing, F1's longest-serving and arguably most politically savvy team principal, there was little chance of change. Horner's ability to spin Red Bull's 2005 entry into a noble rescue act gave the paddock just enough reason to let the issue gather dust. He wasn't just a team boss, he was a gatekeeper of Red Bull's legacy in F1, and as long as he was in the room, few dared to challenge the empire he helped build. But the landscape has shifted dramatically, with Didi Mateschitz gone and Horner now ousted in a move that shocked even Red Bull insiders. The once impenetrable armor has cracked. Suddenly, the topic of dual ownership no longer feels untouchable. In fact, the very manner of Horner's replacement has added fuel to the fire. Laurent Mekies, formerly heading Racing Bulls, seamlessly stepped into Horner's role at Red Bull Racing. No delay, no disruption. Why? Because both team principals are contracted not by their respective F1 outfits, but by the Red Bull parent company in Austria. That meant no gardening leave, no transition period, just a clean switch overnight. And that, reportedly, has not gone unnoticed. Sources suggest the FIA's top brass are now looking into the implications of such a move. The way Mecki's jumped ship without a hitch has reignited questions about just how independent these two teams really are, and whether the blurred lines have finally crossed into territory that even F1's governing body can no longer ignore. Formula One may fiercely guard its image as the pinnacle of engineering independence, but behind the scenes, the lines of separation aren't always so clear. The rules are there, on paper at least. Every team is required to develop its own intellectual property, with strict regulations designed to prevent collaboration on sensitive components. And these boundaries aren't just theoretical. The FIA actively monitors designs, audits data, and imposes guidelines to preserve fairness across the grid. But in practice, things get murky, especially when third parties are involved. Take Haas, for example. While they're a fully fledged constructor in name, their chassis is actually built by the Italian firm Dallara. And while that outsourcing is permitted, there's a crucial catch. Dallara is barred from producing chassis for any other F1 team. The reason? Intellectual property crossover. Even unintentional overlap could violate the very DNA of what defines a constructor in Formula One. Then there's the component market. Haas purchases non-listed parts from Ferrari, perfectly legal under FIA regulations. Red Bull and Racing Bulls do the same within their ecosystem. But this shared pipeline of development, tools, and ideas only deepens concerns about how truly independent these B teams really are. Until now, the system has survived without a full-blown investigation. But the recent Laurent Mekies switch from Racing Bulls to Red Bull Racing without a day of gardening leave may have pushed the issue too far. That seamless transition didn't just raise eyebrows. It pulled back the curtain on just how interconnected the two Red Bull teams really are. Now, the FIA is starting to stir. Nicolas Tombazis, the federation's head of single-seater matters, told The Race, "We are working on clarifying more how teams, let's call them A and B teams, operate, in terms of putting in provisions that stop those that have some sort of close relationship from helping each other or collaborating." The facade of Red Bull's untouchable empire is beginning to crack. What was once admired as a masterclass in efficiency, innovation, and strategic foresight is now being re-examined under a harsh spotlight. The same dual-team structure that gave Red Bull unrivaled control over talent, development data, and political influence is now being viewed through a far more cynical lens, one tainted by accusations of manipulation, blurred ethical boundaries, and a potential disregard for the spirit of competition. With Christian Horner no longer at the helm, Dietrich Mateschitz no longer steering from behind the scenes, and the FIA ramping up its scrutiny, the tide is turning. The once silent whispers in the paddock have become louder and more pointed. The Laurent Mekies swap was just the tip of the iceberg. If the FIA decides to draw a hard line with new rules or enforcement, it won't just be a slap on the wrist. It could mark the beginning of a seismic shift that forces Red Bull to rethink everything about how it operates in Formula One. Should Formula One finally put an end to dual-team ownership, or is Red Bull being unfairly targeted for doing what every other team only wishes it could? Let us know what you think in the comments. Until next time, goodbye for now.